Today, a judge in Myanmar sentenced two Reuters reporters to prison terms. They were charged with illegal possession of official documents. As Nick Schifrin reports, they had been reporting on the government-led massacres of Rohingya villagers.
This morning, Wa Lone walked into court as a journalist. He walked out a convicted criminal and told a phalanx of his former colleagues his conviction eroded his country's rule of law.
They are obviously threatening our democracy and destroying freedom of the press in our country.
He and his colleague, Ja Soo-u, were bundled into the back of a police van, sentenced to 7 years in prison just for doing their jobs, says British Ambassador Dan Chugg.
We think that in a democracy, journalists should be allowed to practice their jobs without intimidation and without fear. And this case has very much undermined freedom of the media in Myanmar.
Last year, Wa Lone was in Yangon, and Ja Soo-u was collecting journalism awards when the two began investigating an exodus. Hundreds of thousands of Rohingya Muslims fled for their lives into Bangladesh. Rohingya are Myanmar natives and have long been targeted by Myanmar's Buddhist military. But last year, the Myanmar military was accused of setting fire to and pillaging Muslim villages with what the UN calls genocidal intent. And in the village of In Din, the Reuters journalists discovered photos of 10 Muslims forced to watch Buddhist neighbors dig a shallow grave. Soon after, they were all dead, shot by Myanmar troops, the first massacre reconstructed with photos and testimony from both victims and Buddhist villagers. The government refused to consider their work journalism. Nobel laureate Aung San Suu Kyi was supposed to lead Myanmar's transition from decades of military rule to a burgeoning democracy. But the government pursued the charges against the journalists as she defended the military's crackdown.
We are the ones who must, in the long term, preserve the stability and security of our country.
But human rights advocates say today's sentencing isn't about stability or security. It's about silencing criticism and is a parody of justice, says Reporters Without Borders' Daniel Bastard.
This very heavy sentence of 7 years against the two journalists is a clear and sad sign that the transition, the democratic transition in Myanmar, is going to an end.
Ja Soo-u's wife used to take their 2-year-old daughter to court and get a kiss from her father. Today, mother and daughter cried outside court as he and Wa Lone were sentenced to spend more time in prison than the soldiers whose crimes they documented.
And with me now is Stephen Adler, the editor-in-chief in Reuters, who joins us from New York. Stephen Adler, thank you very much. The judge today accused your reporters of breaching the Official Secrets Act. Did they breach the Official Secrets Act?
Absolutely not. They violated no law, and in fact, they did absolutely nothing wrong. They are guilty of committing journalism.
And they and their lawyers have told a specific story about how they ended up in court. Do you believe that they were actually set up by the police?
Yes, absolutely. And it's not just the story that they told or that the lawyers told. A police captain testifying for the prosecution admitted under oath in court that the whole thing was a setup, that there had been a meeting to discuss how to set them up, how to provide them with documents that were wrapped up inside a local newspaper, and what to do, and that the fact that they had to be arrested when they left the restaurant where they were meeting. So it was clearly a setup. Also, the testimony of the police was completely non-credible. They had ridiculous locations where they claimed the arrest occurred. One of the people who was supposedly at the arrest said that he had notes of the arrest, but he had burnt them, so he did not have them in court. And another one wrote his script on his hand so he wouldn't forget what to say. This was something where there was just no ambiguity.
And do you think the judge ignored some of that evidence to the contrary? And do you believe that this conviction was preordained?
Well, there's no evidence that rule of law was involved here, no evidence that a typical due process trial was occurring. This did seem like something that just did not comport with what anybody would view as a rule of law case. So we were not at all surprised at the result, because they shouldn't have been arrested and they shouldn't have been charged, and they certainly shouldn't have been convicted. So there was just no evidence, and there were diplomats from many countries in court. There was no ambiguity about it. Nobody disagreed. There was no debate. Everybody understood that this was a complete setup.
Not everyone, of course, believes that. Aung San Suu Kyi is the de facto leader of Myanmar, and she has defended the court in this case. Do you believe that she has been an impediment to the release of the journalists?
Well, I do say that every outside observer who has been studying this trial is absolutely clear that not only are they not guilty, but that the trial was a setup, in many ways a sham. As to what the government's involvement or position is, I think now is the time for us to truly come to understand that, because now is the time, the trial is over, and the government is in the position to do something about it. The government is in the position to release them, to free them. So now's the time we're going to find out to what extent the government is prepared to, first of all, undo this wrong, but also reestablish their position of some respect in the global community. I think everybody's watching. Diplomats from all over the world have been in the courtroom, have been participating. Secretary Pompeo went to talk to the foreign minister. Nikki Haley at the UN spoke very, very strongly on our behalf, on behalf of our journalists in the Security Council. So I think now is the time to find out what the Myanmar government actually intends to do.
Do you have any notion that the government would consider commuting their sentences, or Aung San Suu Kyi could be involved in trying to reverse this decision?
I have no evidence at all, but I know that we are going to work very hard starting now to do everything we can to get them released, and we think there are opportunities to get them released. And it's our job, and we are absolutely committed to trying to get them out.
And have you spoken to Aung San Suu Kyi, or has there been any communication with her, and has she been an impediment in this case?
You know, I don't want to personalize this, and we've done a lot of back-channel diplomacy work, and I don't want to compromise anybody who may have done one thing or another. But what I can say is we're not trying to make this a personal thing. We're trying to help the process go forward so that they can be released, and that is our only goal. We're not taking sides in any conflict. We're not anti-government. We don't take positions as Reuters. We just try to report the news. So in this situation, we're just trying to get them out. That's all we're trying to do.
And you are still reporting the news. What will the impact of this case be on your ability and your desire to cover Myanmar and the ongoing story in Myanmar and Bangladesh?
Well, we published the story that they didn't want us to publish even after our journalists were in prison. We published the massacre of the 10 Rohingya Muslims in the village of Indin, and we've continued to do investigative pieces about exactly how various of the attacks and massacres have occurred and what's going on in the refugee camps, and we absolutely intend to do that. We have not been intimidated, we've not been deterred, and we won't be. We think this is a very important story. The only reason we're there is to do important stories. The only reason an organization like ours goes to dangerous places is not to court danger, but to get great stories, to get important stories. And we think this is an important story, and we're going to continue to cover it.
Stephen Adler, editor-in-chief of Reuters, thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick.